Hi, Old Man Taylor coming to you from the garage. And today's topic, solar generators. And these are really portable power sources that are marketed and sold as solar generators. We're not going to dig into the different brands and the different features and all that kind of stuff. That's not what this is about today. What this is about is practical application. How can we use one of these? What applications? And can we tie that into our house? Can we power our house? Well, while we're going through that process, there's a second question that's going to come up, and that is, should we? If we can, what is it going to give us? What is it going to do for us? What should we expect? We're going to answer both of those questions as we go through this and hopefully learn something today. So the first question about how I'm going to tie this into my house is my house. So in a previous video, I showed how to install a generator inlet box, how to add an interlock system to prevent any power that's coming in through this box from backfeeding into my utility and safely do that. This is what I recommend doing. It's the safe way to do it. It is the legal way to do that. So I will post a link to that video here. I'll also put it at the very end. So if you want to watch this whole thing and then, take a look, do that. But I strongly recommend this setup for tying any power and backfeeding into your house. All right. With that being said, we're going to assume that that's our situation and that's what we want to tie into. So to tie into that, I have a 30 amp generator extension cord that plugs into my inlet box. Okay. This end will go to a conventional gasoline or propane powered generator, right? So if I look at that, I've got four prongs on here. And if I look at this particular solar generator, it doesn't have a 4-prong outlet. In fact, none of them do. So that's why I have two. I have two different setups we're going to talk about how to do this with. So how do I make that plug into there? Well, I do have this 30 amp, what's called an RV plug. It's a 3-prong, not a 4-prong plug. And it is rated to 30 amps, which is 30 amps, 30 amps, 30 amps. So we're all aligned there, no problem, if I could just make this work, right? Well, there is a commercially available adapter designed specifically to take this to that, okay? The connection is pretty simple. We just line up the grounds just like we would for our regular generator. We plug it in, we give it a little twist. Don't forget to do that. That locks it all together. And then I'm looking at my 3 prongs. So I've got my 3 prongs, that plugs right in. Am I all set? Am I good now to connect this to my house? Well, hold on, not necessarily. All right, so let's talk about this. I don't want to get into a lot of electrical theory here, but there is a piece we need to understand. And that is, when I look at my breakers, I've got single pole breakers, skinny breakers, and I've got double pole breakers. I've got fat breakers. What is that about? Well, every other tab that these plug into is 120 volts to neutral. Then every other one is also 120 to neutral, but they're different 120 to neutrals. If I take the 120 and instead of going to neutral, I go to the other 120 and I put those together, I'm going to get 240 volts. That's where my 240 comes from. Okay. Why am I saying that? Well, because when I measure this plug, what I'm going to want to see, what I'm going to want to look at is, do I have 120 on the hot and 120 on the other hot, both to neutral, and then 240 to each other, right? So that's one of the first things I want to check. Do I have 120 on both legs? That's check 1. Check 2 is, do I have 240 from hot to hot, right? And then I need to know, am I passing my neutral all the way through to here? I've got to be. That has to work. And then the other part is the ground. So I don't want to get too complex on the ground. I'll probably do a whole video on the ground. But the point is, we've got floating and bonded ground generators. Which do I need and which do I have? Okay, so in this setup, in my home distribution panel, I have a bonded neutral and ground in this panel. I can only have one in the entire system. So that means my generator, whether it be gas or solar generator, needs to be floating. It doesn't need to be bound. I should not have neutral and ground together. So what do I actually have, right? I can't see that looking at it. I don't know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up another camera so we've got a nice shot of this, get my voltmeter. We're going to check it out. We're going to see what this guy is actually generating. And is it okay? What does it mean if I connect that to my house? All right, that's next. Okay, so now I'm set up with my my meter and my plug, my outlet. My outlet has 4 connections. I've got a 120. I've got 120 on the opposite side. I have neutral here, and I have ground at the top. So what I should see is if I connect to my 120 and my neutral, I should see 120 volts. All right, let's see if we have that. And we do, 120. It should be 110 to 125, something like that. All right, so this side should also be 120, and I should have 120 to neutral. And I do, if I can hold it steady, 120. Okay, so I've got both of my 120 and I have a neutral, okay? Do I have 240? If I connect my 120 and my 120, and I move that around a little bit to be sure I've got good connection there, I do not have 240. They're the same 120 leg feeding my panel, so that could be a problem. We'll talk about that in a minute. All right, then the next thing is, is my bonded or am I a floating ground? So if I check my 120 to neutral, I have my 120. If I go to ground, if I have my 120, they're bonded, and I do not. So they are open, they are floating. Floating is what we wanted. Okay, so let's talk about these results. What does that mean? I've got 120. I can feed all of my little breakers just fine. My neutral is passing through. That's perfect. I've got a floating ground, which for my panel having the bond is perfect. But I don't have 240 volts. So what does that mean? Well, that means any breaker that I have that is a double pole breaker, a 240 breaker, that takes up the space of 2 breakers, it is not safe to turn on. It will not get 240 volts. You'll get half that voltage, and that will cause my amperage to increase, and I will burn up things. All right. So yes, I can plug this into my house as long as I'm very aware that I cannot power any 240 volt device. I must turn off every 240 volt breaker, probably put a piece of tape across them so I don't accidentally turn them on. If I do turn them on, I can damage that appliance. And that's probably my air conditioner, that's probably my dryer, that's probably my electric stove, things like that I don't want to destroy. Okay, so that this system with my RV plug can power small devices. And we'll talk about the practical application, how many watts I can use and all that, and when we get to the end. And we're probably not going to want to do that anyway. But we need to be aware that if we do, we will destroy that equipment. Okay, so that's the downside with using this RV plug setup. Here's another setup, different setup. I don't have the RV plug here. What I have instead are a series of outlets. I have 4 outlets here. These outlets are rated to 15 amps for each one. So I'm once again going to have a problem with my generator plug not having anywhere to actually plug in. As you may have guessed, there is a commercially available adapter that would tie this all together. Can we use this setup? Well, let's take a look at it. So, and just one of those safety pieces that I probably should mention, anytime I'm connecting any type of generator to my house, what I want to be sure that I never do is have an exposed plug like this that is actually plugged in to anything. So I want to leave my cables, always have my cables disconnected, always plug these exposed ends in before I power my generator or turn on my breaker and actually plug into my house. So I want to be aware of that as I work through this. It's okay to have them exposed as long as the other end is not plugged into anything. So one of the ways I do that is I start by building my cord completely before either end is plugged in. That end is loose and that end is loose. Now I've got two choices here on what to plug in now. This end does not have exposed connectors. This one does. So we're going to plug that end in first. All right, if we do it the other way around, we're creating a shock potential, and the term suicide plug is a plug that has males on both ends. Got its name because of that shock hazard. Even though I've got things turned off, you could accidentally turn something on and not be aware. Forget in the heat of the moment. Remember, you're probably going to be doing this while the lights are off and you're in, holding a flashlight and maybe in a catastrophic storm. Who knows? So just make that a habit, make that a practice. So using that idea, we're going to go ahead and plug in here. Now, I have a potential energy source. I don't have it turned on, but once again, my generator plug doesn't have any exposed metal now, so that's the proper process to do that. Okay, so I plug both of these in, and we might be able to already start reasoning through this. We may have the same problem that we had with our other generator. The 120 legs, the two different 120 legs may be actually the same leg. But I don't know that. Right now I do have a neutral and a ground, so I may have a new problem. I might have a bonded neutral and ground in this particular setup. Don't know for sure. We won't know until we do the same thing. We get our meter out and measure that, and I'll show you what those results are. Okay, we have our camera set up now. This time our cord is flipped upside down just because of the way that it naturally needed to lay, so I could take a shot of this. So just to point out, I've got 120 here, 120 here. This is my neutral and this is my ground. So when we test this, what we want to see, the same thing. I want to see 120 volts from here to neutral. So I'll put one lead in neutral and one lead in 120. It doesn't matter which one, by the way, the colors don't matter. And I've got 110.9. All right, so I've got good. My 120 really should be somewhere between 110 and 125, 28 even. That's okay. That's a little lower than the other one. Interesting, but it's okay. So then I want to see that same thing on the other side or similar. And this time it's 110 point. It looks like it was 8, 9, something like that, almost 111 volts. So I do have my two legs of 110 going to neutral. Now, my check for my 240 is my 120 to my 120, and I should see 240 here. And what I see is 2.6. If you can see that decimal place, I don't have 240. So that tells me that those two legs, my 115 or my 120 volts, are the same leg. I don't have 240 volts, the exact same problem I had with my other one. Now, the last question is my neutral and my ground tied together, or are they floating? So if I check my 120 to ground instead of neutral, I don't want to see 120, and I see that 2.3. So that tells me my neutral and my ground are not bonded together. That is correct. I have 120 volts, 110, call that 120, on both of my legs, which is correct. I just don't have my 240. So the question is, can I? And the answer is yes, with an asterisk. And the asterisk is I must be sure all of my 240 breakers are turned off. I don't turn them on while I'm under generator power. So that's question number one. Answered. Yes, it's possible. Question number two. Should I? It's a bigger question. Let's dig into that. All right, question two. Should we? Let's talk about that for a minute. What can we expect to get out of these? What do these numbers mean And how does this actually work, right? So first thing is, let's talk about the numbers. When we look at a generator, they're generally sold in watts. We see 5,000 watts. What does that mean? Well, that means that generator can produce 5,000 watts continuously without overloading. And there may be a second number that's higher. That means peak, like a refrigerator starting up and the compressor pulling a little bit more than that for a very short period of time. But that we're talking about watts rated in what it can continuously produce. Okay. When we look at our portable power sources that are being sold as generators, they give us that number also. And that's usually in the model number, or it's the big number. Both of these are very similar. They're in that 2,400 watt range. Well, that means if I plug in my house, I can run up to 2,400 watts of continuous draw. That number is the same as a generator. All right, what's the difference? Well, a gasoline or propane powered generator, that number, it can do that continuously until it runs out of fuel. Okay, then I just have to refuel it and I can do it again. These have a second number that determine how long it can do that. And that's the size of my battery. These are all large batteries. That's what they are, very sophisticated, large batteries. So in the case of these two, they're both rated at about 2,000 watt hours. There's a second number in that, or a second letter, H, right? That's hours. What does that mean? So I've got 2,400 continuous, but I only have a 2,000 watt hour battery. Does that mean I can get 2,400 out of it? Yeah, actually I can, but less than an hour, right? So I've got 2,000 watt hours means I can pull up to 2,000 watts for 1 hour. That's how that math works out. So just for an hour. And then I've got to refill my fuel, right? Just like my regular generator, that means I run out of gas. Well, in this case, that means my battery's dead. So I've got to recharge my battery. Well, there's the big practical difference between the two. I can get a 5-gallon can and refill my gas generator and start it back up. Whereas this is going to be recharged a number of different ways. And that is one of their advantages is they can be recharged a lot of different ways. None of those are going to be instant. They're going to be very slow. So the big one, solar in the name, I can hook up solar panels and I can charge this while it's also sending out electricity and slow that bleed rate down, or I can shut it off and charge it very quickly, comparatively, relatively, but not quick in any stretch. The other way I can charge this, of course, is plugging it into a wall. Well, if I can plug it into a wall, I probably don't need it in this application. And then the third most common is, a car charger. I can plug in a 12-volt car charger, so I can start up my car and charge it. Hours, right? 10 and 12 hours to recharge it that way. Okay, so that means I don't have near the capacity to run appliances for any length of time at all. So I've got two of these sitting here, 2,400 watts. I got almost 5,000 watts, which that's not the same as a gasoline generator. It is in peak load, but not in duration. Okay, so what can I use this for? Well, a couple things. It's not useless, but it won't run my air conditioner. The big thing is we just figured out we can't run any 240 devices at all. So my air conditioner is not going to run, and now we know it wouldn't run very long anyway, less than an hour. So I don't want to use it for that application. I don't want to use it for heavy draw. Where it might be useful, hooking it up to my house, might be very useful, right? Is being able to turn on lights in the bathroom, turn on the light while I'm using the restroom, then turn off the light when I leave. That type of application, this is going to excel at. I'm going to want to run LED type lights, very low power lights versus my, the old incandescent screw-in 60-watt light bulb. I don't want to run a 60-watt light bulb. A 9-watt light bulb is going to run for days on this thing, right? But a 60 is actually going to drag it down. In fact, The lights that I'm using to light myself up in my quote studio here for this video are currently running through this generator. So let's kick that on and get an idea of what I'm talking about. So it's pulling 57 watts right now to run all the lights that are on me. So that, roughly 60 watts is what I'm running. This is telling me I can do that for 23 hours. Okay. So, worst case scenario, I'm using this guy because of a hurricane, and I'm going to go a week without power. And I'm saying that because that is exactly what we experienced not very long ago, maybe a month ago. So let's talk about what does that look like. Well, that means I can run this 24/7. I can leave these lights on all the time for 23 hours without recharging. But I'm going to recharge with solar panels during the day, all right? So I can leave these lights on and also recharge this. How long is that going to take? Well, when we're talking about solar panels, once again, I could probably do an entire video on this, but these are usually sold with about a 200 watt panel in a kit is kind of how they come. So if I'm coming in with 200 watts and I've got to replace 2,000 watts, that means I need 10 hours of really perfect sun. It's not going to happen. It's not realistic. I'd be moving the panels all day, trying to keep them all at exactly 90 degrees, no clouds whatsoever passing over, and it's not in the winter. It's got to be in the summer, and I might need to live kind of close to the equator, right? To get that 200 watts. Probably not going to happen. 200 watt panels aren't generally going to give me 200 watts. They're going to give me 150, 160, something like that. And that's with me still having to reposition them a few times during the day to catch that the sun as it moves overhead. So just keep in mind, if I'm buying a 2,000 watt and I'm buying 200 watt panels, it's not realistic I'm going to be able to recharge that in a day. I'm not going to be able to use all of that. Plus, it's a battery. I don't want to run it all the way to zero either. I probably want to stop somewhere around 30% to save the life of the battery. And probably don't want to charge it to 100 either. I probably want to stop a little bit short, 90%, something like that, and that can be argued. But there is a percentage, I want to slow down and not, quote, top it off. So I don't even have the 2,000 watts that's rated on the battery. It's probably more like 1,600, realistically, 1,500 watts, something like that. But even with that, my 200 watts is really going to struggle to recharge. So, I'm probably going to want 400. I'll cut that time in half. 800, I'll cut it into a quarter. Now, if I go to something as large as that, 800 watts, this actually starts coming into play. Can I run a refrigerator on it, for instance? Let's think about that for a minute. So when we look at the plate on our refrigerator, it's going to tell us this thing uses like 350 watts or something like that. We start doing that math against this, and we can't run that very long. Turns out that that's only when it's running, and most of the time it's actually not running. So realistically, a modern refrigerator is actually running in this range, which means I can, in fact, run a refrigerator on this, keep my food nice and cool, not going into the dumpster, set up my panels and recharge this during the day after a hurricane or a snowstorm or something like that. We generally happen to have clear skies for a few days, right? Because that storm kind of clears that out. So I can probably actually do that and power my house. So I can turn on that bathroom light. I can plug my phone in and charge it in all of my outlets. They'll all work. But I'm not going to be running my big 70-inch plasma TV if you happen to have one. That pulls a lot of power, right? Could I run a small LCD style TV that, pulls 60, 70 watts, something like that? Yeah, for a few hours, sure. Can I power my modem and my router so I have internet if my internet provider is providing that during my outage? Yeah, actually I can. I'm probably going to want to turn that on and off and really unplug it when I'm not using it. But I could use it to stream some entertainment while I'm bored with the lights off. Yep, sure can. Real practical application, that's what it looks like. I'm not going to be able to do dishes in the dishwasher. I'm not going to be able to wash clothes. I'm not going to be able to run my air conditioner. I'm not going to run a ceiling fan. Those things actually pull more power and are going to cause this battery to drain very, very quickly. And unless I've got a large solar array to recharge it, which I probably don't because it's portable, right? I'm not going to be able to replace that power. Now, how about a intermittent power outage? You know, somebody hits a light pole, and my power's going to be out for a few hours. I don't know how long, but it's not. I'm not in some catastrophic situation. I just know it's a temporary outage. Now it really makes sense, right? Because I can power up a lot of my house. I'm going to still turn off all of my 240 appliances. They have to be turned off, but so no air conditioning, right? But I will be able to run, you know, just about everything in my house as long as I'm practical with that 240 and conscious to not accidentally just load things. Just don't leave lights on. When I leave a room, turn them back off. I'll get a few hours out of that. Real good application right there. So, second question, should I? Depends on what I expect and whether really do I need that air conditioning. That's really the big piece that tends to drive people into larger generators when they get one and they realize it can't run your air conditioner either. They end up stepping up and getting larger and larger generators so they can run more and more. So just be aware that this is well under that smallest generator as far as longevity goes. The major upside, after a major storm, gasoline is hard to get. Gas stations don't have power, and when they do get power, everyone needs gas, right? So you know, long lines, they run out very short, and the distribution system is damaged. Like we just came out of a hurricane and experienced, it was a week before you could count on driving to the gas station and getting gas. Would this shine in that environment? Oh yeah, you know, I can make a pot of coffee in the morning and invite my neighbors over, and we can sit outside and enjoy the wonderful weather after the storm, and pull up the internet and see what's going on. Right? You know, to check out the news through the internet just fine. I can do all that, and I don't have that sound problem at night. If I'm trying to run a generator at night, which is, you know, I've got no lights, that's one of the primary times I'm going to do that. My neighbors become a problem with the, you know, the sound, the decibels, and I may even have trouble sleeping because I've got this gasoline generator running. These are completely silent, right? So no problem there, right? So there's your pros and your cons, your ups and your downs. Is it for me or not is going to depend on all those factors. Can't really definitively say it's a good idea for everyone. I will say it is a good idea for some people. Just be aware of what you're getting into. All right, as I promised, here is the video for the generator inlet setup to go along with that. And if you would, please subscribe and hit the like button. Thank you.